this video, we're going to look at completion percent invoicing. We'll go over how invoices are created and how they build on one another. We'll also look at the terms and conditions, the statement you can use, and how all of this relates to this invoicing style. We'll even touch on retention, which is an optional feature for this type of invoicing. Jumping into my account now, and I'll start with an estimate that hasn't been turned into a job yet. And when we press Create Job, from there we have the option to select our invoicing style. Completion percent invoicing is still based on a fixed contract price, so in that sense, it's similar to fixed price invoicing. The key difference is how you bill. With fixed price, you invoice in lump sum stages. For example, 20% for deposit, 20% for base stage, and so on. With completion percent, you bill based on the actual progress of the job. So instead of preset stages, you're invoicing for the percentage of work completed across your cost categories, usually on a regular schedule like monthly or fortnightly. For example, if drywall totals $10,000 and you've completed 20% of the work, your invoice for that portion would be $2,000. And each invoice draws down from the cost categories you set up in your estimate costing screen. Then we have the option for retention, and we'll come back to retention, but first let's open a job that's already set up with the completion percent invoicing. From there, we'll look at some unique features of this invoicing style, and we'll walk through how to create and edit invoices. Now that I'm in my completion percent job, to create an invoice, we'll click the green plus button. Like I mentioned earlier, completion percent projects are typically billed on a rolling schedule. In this example, I'll say we're billing monthly, so I'll name the invoice October invoice, just to show the billing period, but you can label it however you like. From there, you'll see a list of all your cost categories, their totals, what's been claimed so far, which will be empty on the first invoice, and what's remaining. You can enter claims either by dollar amount or by percentage, whichever you prefer, and both fields update to automatically show the equivalent. For instance, if I claim 20% from general requirements, you'll see the dollar amount appear beside it. You can also click the green button to automatically claim 100% of that category. So I'll claim 100% for general requirements, maybe 50% for existing conditions, and 50% for framing. Below that, you can add notes visible to the client, and I'll go ahead and add one here so you can see where it appears on the invoice. And once you're happy with the details, you can either save and send, if you're ready to send it to your client, or save and close to keep it as a draft. I'll choose save and close for now. And if you want to preview what the invoice will look like, we can click the print button on the right-hand side. Quick note though, because we haven't sent this invoice yet, and its status is still pending, if you print it right now, you'll see a draft watermark across the page. Once you send the invoice and the status changes to invoiced, that watermark will automatically disappear. So don't worry, your client won't see it when you do share the invoice. And two quick things to point out here. First, you'll notice a payment due date field. This is empty for now, but this will fill in once you send it to your client, and I'll show where you can edit this in a moment. And second, there are payment terms at the bottom, and these are also editable. So if we jump back into Build Exact, above our list of invoices, you'll see a default due days setting. This defaults to 14 days, meaning the client has 14 days to pay after the invoice is sent, and this will populate into the payment due field on our invoice. And you can make edits to this here. And to adjust the payment terms, click the little gear icon at the top right of the invoice list, then select Manage Payment Terms, and you can make any changes you need. When you're ready to send the invoice to your client, you'll click the Share button, which is right next to the print option, and a side panel opens with a few options before sending. First, you'll choose what to include: invoice only, statement only, or both. By default, both are selected, and we'll leave it that way so you can see how your client receives them. Once you share the invoice, Build Exact automatically updates the status from pending to invoiced, though you can turn that off if needed. Next, select your recipients. If you use the client portal, you'll see that option listed at the top, and we cover the client portal in another video, so I won't go into detail here. You'll also see your client's email listed, and you can add additional recipients if needed. Then there is the email tab, where you can customize the body of the email, and there's also an attachments tab for any extra files you want to include. Once everything looks good, click share, and I've sent this to myself, so I'll give it a moment and then we'll jump into my inbox to see exactly what your client would receive. All right, here's our client's point of view. Here they have the option to view the invoice, and they also have the PDF version of the invoice and the invoice statement. If we click into the invoice, either the PDF or using the view button, it shows all the information we saw before, but now with an established due date and of course no draft watermark. They'll see the list of the cost categories, their percentage claimed, remaining amounts, and the invoice total. If we go over to the invoice statement, this shows all of the invoices, their status, how much we've received, and a summary of the project. That includes the contract total, any change orders added, and the adjusted contract total. And across from that, they'll see how much they've been invoiced, how much they've paid to date, and their current balance for the project. Now, at this point, we've sent the client our invoice, so let's move on to marking them as paid. Back in BuildExact, once you've received a payment, click into the invoice you want to log a payment against. At the top right corner, you'll see the invoice's current status, in this case, invoiced, and you'll click into the status and change it to received. This will prompt you to enter how much they paid, the date you received the payment, a reference number like the payment date or check number, plus any notes. If they didn't pay the full invoice, you can adjust the amount here to reflect what they actually paid, and you can keep recording partial payments if needed. For example, I'll log a payment of $500. Once I press save and close, the status changes to part received, and again, I'll press save and close, and a few days later, when they pay the remainder, we'll click back into the invoice, scroll down to the payments section, and click the plus button to log another payment. BuildExact automatically knows what's remaining, so I'll record the remaining balance, press save and close, and now the status updates to received. And when I'm ready to create the next invoice, I'll click the plus button again, and it will show what we've already claimed from our cost categories. So far, I've claimed 100% from general requirements, so I can't claim more there, but I still have remaining amounts in other categories. And I can click either the green button to claim the remainder of a category, or draw down by a smaller percentage or amount. Also, if you'd like to print the invoice statement for yourself, you can always click into the little gear button on the top right side of our invoice list and click Print Invoice Statement. And now that we've marked our first invoice as received, you'll notice it shows in our Received to Date field there too. All right, now that we've gone over completion percent invoicing without retention, let's take a look at how retention works when you add it in. I'll start by opening an estimate that hasn't been converted into a job yet, and from there, I'll select completion percent invoicing and then turn on the option to calculate retention. If retention is something you already use in your business, this part will probably feel familiar since it's usually built right into the contract. But if you're new to it or just curious, I'll walk through what it means and how it works in BuildExact. Retention is essentially a small portion of each payment that your client holds back until the end of the project. Kind of like a security deposit on a rental property or the hold a car rental company puts on your card, just in case if something goes wrong. It's there as a safeguard for the client in case there are any defects or issues that need fixing after the job's complete. Exactly how much retention is handled can vary depending on your contract, but it's usually clearly laid out. Things like how much is held, when it's released, and under what conditions. Typically, retention is held for a set period and then paid back to you once the project is complete, assuming there aren't any defects or deductions. For example, some contracts might release half of the retained amount when the job is finished, and the remaining half 6 months later. That said, retention can be set up in a few different ways, depending on your agreement. When you're configuring it in Build Exact, you'll first define the retention total. That's the total amount being held back. For example, you might choose 5% of the client's contract total. You can also decide whether that 5% applies only to the contract price or if it should include change orders as well. If you start the project with change orders excluded, you can switch it to include them later, but not the other way around. Again, this is usually spelled out in your contract. And for this example, I'll go ahead and leave it set to exclude change orders. Next, you'll set how much retention is held per invoice. In this case, we're holding 10% of each invoice until we reach the overall 5% retention cap. This approach front loads retention, meaning you collect it earlier in the project, so by the time you reach the final invoices, there's no more retention being held because you've already hit that cap. Of course, you can choose to spread it evenly, for instance, 5 and 5, if you prefer to hold the same amount across all invoices. The benefit of front loading is that in the later stages of the project, when cash flow might be tighter, no additional retention is being withheld. All right, now I'll go ahead and create the job and open up the invoices. Here you'll see everything broken down, including the total retention amount being held, which in this example is 5% overall. You'll also notice the Include Change Orders button I mentioned earlier, if you want your retention total to include change orders added later in the project. That's where you turn it on. You can also see how much retention has been held to date, and we'll look at how this changes as we process invoices. So I'll go ahead and issue the first invoice, and you'll see the retention instantly starts to build up. And I'm going to quickly run through and invoice the rest just to show what it looks like at the end of our project. Now, once all your invoices are marked as either invoiced or received, you're ready to claim the retention back. From there, you'll see a green plus button appear, and you'll click that to add your retention invoice. Just enter a description and the amount you're claiming, either as a percentage or a dollar value. And in this case, I'll pretend we're claiming 50% upon completion of the project. And when you mark that as invoiced, you'll see how much of the retention you've claimed so far, along with any remaining balance still held. One last thing to note, when you're calculating retention, the invoice statement includes a dedicated section for that. So I'll go ahead and print that one more time. And here you can see that section shows the total held to date, the amount invoiced back, and the remaining retention still outstanding. And that's it for completion percent invoicing with the option of retention. As always, if you have any questions, please let us know.